All right. I'm really looking forward to this talk. The last two sessions of the day are on influencer marketing. Rachel Ten Brink, who was the former CMO of Scentbird, is going to break it down for us from from micro and even customer influencers all the way up to the big boys.
Sure.
Yeah. All
Great.
right.
I'm going to share some slides.
Perfect. I'll let you take it away from here.
Yeah. Hold on one second. Hold on one second. Okay.
I don't think it went.
No? Sorry about that. Is that?
Yeah, here it comes.
Yep. You guys got it?
We're good. Totally good.
Cool. So I guess what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit, talk a lot about influencers, both from my personal experience with Scentbird and also what I've learned in the last 6 years doing D2C marketing and focusing particularly on the power of influencers. Yeah, got it. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to talk about was a little bit about the definitions of influencers. What does it mean to be a large influencer? What does it mean to be a micro influencer? What does it mean to be your customer? How you should be thinking about each of them? Because I really think that to be successful in influencer marketing, one of the most important things you should be doing from the beginning is thinking about where is your business, where you think will be the most powerful influencers for your business, and then testing those hypotheses. So, a lot of influencer marketing, unfortunately or fortunately, there's a lot of science, but there's also a lot of art. And a lot of it, you will see as I walk you through the steps, will be a lot of testing and learning and setting up your program for influencer marketing so that you can continue to test and learn and identify where there is arbitrage, where there are opportunity to acquire those customers in a cost-effective way. And I think you need to think about the different tiers of influencers a little bit differently. So when I think about your A-tier influencer, I think the first thing to think about is those really large influencers. And I'm talking, again, it really depends on your category. I think when you look at gaming or some of these really, really large categories, you might be looking even beyond the 500,000. But in beauty, fashion, sort of the categories that I worked mostly in, I would say the A tier starts at 500,000, but goes all the way up to multiple million followers. You also have that B tier, and I think that B tier is sort of, a little under 500,000 to the 100,000. Again, that's a very large range. But what you need to think about is those influencers that fall within those categories, they're really about reach and awareness. So, they don't, obviously, when you have 1 million followers, you don't have a personal relationship with every single consumer that you're speaking to, but there is a huge awareness that they can achieve. There's a huge reach. I will note that sometimes you need to be careful because these larger influencers with the reach and awareness might actually have higher CPAs. In our experience, what we found was particularly in the 500,000 to 100,000, there was a lot of them that tended to have higher CPAs. What we saw was the really, really large ones are really expensive, but they have such a huge reach that the CPAs go down. And then if you go to the right hand of the slide, sort of the C and the micro, those were cheaper. But where it got really tricky was that 500 to 100, because a lot of them could be quite pricey and they maybe don't have the reach to justify the spend. So I think you need to be really smart, really targeted, particularly with the B tier. When you look at C tier influencers, sort of the 10 to 100,000 follower. And, when I talk about influencers, I'm mostly talking Instagram and YouTube, but it really can apply to any platform. It could be somebody on LinkedIn. It could be somebody on Snapchat. But generally, these numbers are a good rule of thumb. And then the micro influencers are the under 10,000. And I think there's a lot of conversation going on around these micro influencers because you can they can be quite inexpensive. They can be very cost effective. And what we're noticing is the engagement rate is so much higher because they're really, when they're that small, they really do have a much more personal connection with their audience, and therefore can be a lot more inspiring, can be a lot more persuasive in their speech. Also, if you look at Instagram, particularly when you look at the number of followers to the number of likes, their engagement rate tends to be a lot higher. And those are much better quality influencers than going for somebody who's huge, but only gets like a 0.1% engagement rate. Whereas when you see a micro influencer, you might see somebody with a 2 or a 3%. And the way we measure that is you look at the total follower count, and then you look at the number of likes and drive down the percentage. So what I recommend is that once you have a good sense of the marketplace, you start to think about, what's your budget? How much can you afford paid, and how much how much product you have that you can seed unpaid, and allocate at least rough percentages of how you want to split your influencer marketing program. The next slide is really about, I'm going to go through a couple of slides on the best practices of how to run an influencer marketing program. And the first thing I will say is I believe in owning the data. There are a lot of programs out there where you can run the database through their programs. There's a lot of influencer marketing platforms that want you to do that. Personally, I'm a big proponent of build your own and own that data, because it can go with you wherever you decide. If you go from if you try one influencer platform and it doesn't work, if you decide to try something else, if you're using multiple platforms, which I recommend, you'll want to own the data. You'll want to have that database. And the way we did it is kind of old school, very basic. One of the first things I recommend is start by searching your competitors on YouTube. Start seeing who are your competitors using on YouTube. And the reason we're using YouTube is because it's easier to search. So you put in the name, let's say for Scentbird, we started with Ipsy. Who is covering Ipsy? And you build a list of every single influencer. Start going through through the videos, the reviews that they're getting, and start seeing who you would want. I really, again, very simple, just on Google Sheets, create a spreadsheet with their data. Their handle is really important. The reason for that is that sometimes influencers change the name on their channel, but the handle on YouTube and the handle on Instagram don't change. So you'll be able to track them over the years if you continue to use them. Their name is important because they're people. They want to be addressed as people. They are Kelly and Stacy and Aaron, and they want to have real names. So I think it's really important when you build a database to have those names so you can address them as human beings, not just through their stage name, through the name that they use on Instagram or YouTube. Number of followers, super important. This one gets really tricky because obviously those numbers are changing all the time, hopefully growing. So what we used to do is every time we'd review an influencer, every time we'd go back to work with them, we'd update those numbers. But it also gives you a good sense of how quickly they're growing. You also can always use Stat Social. There are some free tools online where you can look at YouTuber growth and see not only how quickly they're growing, but how quickly they're projected to continue to grow, which is very handy, particularly if you're looking at long-term contracts or you're looking to book somebody, 6 months from now. It helps to get a sense of how quickly they'll grow because it'll help with the rate negotiations. Average views, super important. The way we determine the rates, if you are paying, is through views, not followers, because in the end, that's what really matters. It's the eyeballs that are going onto your video. So the way we calculated average views is you look at the last 5 videos or the last 5 posts, take out any outliers. If there's something that's just totally huge amount of views or very, very low views, just take it out, but average out the last 5 posts. It needs to be recent, and that'll give you a good sense of your average view. Content type, again, very important to track that because it'll allow you to build a database and figure out, okay, what types of contents work. When you go back and measure the results, you have hypotheses, but you can test them and see what's actually working. And the contact info. So I get a lot of questions about, well, how do you reach out to influencers? And we're going to go through some platforms in the next couple of slides. But one very basic thing is you can look in their about section, and I put a little arrow. A lot of times they'll include their work email there. So that's a good way. And another trick that I always recommend is that if you can't get their email from YouTube, oftentimes the same influencer will actually post her contact info on Instagram, but not on YouTube. So again, it's a good tool to have both. And if it's an influencer that has other channels, usually you can reach them through one email and book multiple posts across different platforms. So different approaches for micro to macro. What I mean here is that there are a lot of tools out there, and certain tools work better for different sized influencers. So this time I'm actually going to start from the smaller to the bigger. So the big thing I would say with the micro influencers, with those under 10,000, is that if you have the workforce, and I think this is where interns can be very helpful, is to actually just write out the email, and we'll talk about the script and the process in the next slide, but really just reach out to them directly. Oftentimes you don't have to offer them anything but product. Hey, here's my free product. It does get challenging if your product is very expensive. But in general, offering the slides can be very, very helpful. Here's where it's very important to build a database. We've talked about using consumers as influencers. And here, what you can do is start looking at your referral program. Who are your top referrers? Who are your top consumers that are really influencing other people? And maybe start providing them perks just as you would for an influencer to get them to talk more often about your products. When you start going into, there are a few platforms that work well for micro. There's Influencer, which I do like. It works well. However, it's very, very expensive, I find, for the amount of influencers that you're going to get. There is another one called Octoly, where you pay a monthly fee, and it's basically a marketplace where small influencers pick you to feature in their products and ask you for free product. So those work well. When you're looking at this sort of smaller 10 to 100,000, those C-tier influencers, again, there's no substitute for having your own database, but I do find there are some great platforms out there. We used Aspire a lot. I've known them since way back when they were called Refluence. They're great. Grapevine, FameBit, although the quality on FameBit can be give or take. And what I will say with all these databases and all these platforms is that they provide you a lot of data about the influencers in the platform, but you again take a minute, look at the influencer yourself, take a look at their YouTube channel, take a look at their Instagram. Don't just trust the numbers on the platform, because sometimes they're outdated, sometimes they're biased. You really need to take a quick look, particularly if you're going to be spending money on these influencers. Make sure you know they're the right ones for your business. When you start going into the A and B tier, I find the platforms to be less and less useful, particularly when you're going to the really large, sort of those 500,000 plus. A lot of them have agents. They're not going to even bother being on the platforms. And what we found sometimes is that they're more expensive on the platforms than they are on just reaching out to them directly. So one tip I would give you is that if you are working with agents, because they're making money on every post, you might be able to negotiate lower rates if you book multiple influencers that are under one agent. So you might be able to say, hey, we're going to do these 3 influencers, we'll negotiate the rates. And by the way, rates are always negotiable. That's the one thing I can't influence enough. You are always able to say, hey, can we get a little lower? Can we get 2 posts for X value? Can we get an extra Instagram post along with the YouTube? There's always ways to structure those deals. And so don't be afraid to negotiate hard. Be nice, be kind, they're people, but they're definitely able to negotiate. Which leads exactly to this next slide on the best practices of outreach to post. So as I was saying, once you've built up your database, once you've identified on the platforms, who do you want to work with? I think one of the most important things that'll save you incredible amounts of time and just really helps is testing the script. How do you outreach? The first email is super important. You have to be personable, short. These people get gazillions of emails. Get to the point. What do you want from them? And clear. Offer them, a little bit of praise goes a long way. Make sure they feel that you actually took the minute to look at their channel. And one thing I do recommend is email outreach tools. We use Persist IQ. There are a bunch of them out there, but it does help a lot, particularly to know if the influencer is opening the email that you sent out or not, because that's half the battle. Follow up a lot, but nicely. Again, these influencers get bombarded with emails. It might go to junk. They might never get it. Just expect that 70% of your emails are not going to get opened. So it is a little bit of a daunting task. If you're working with agents, if we are working with larger influencers, they're more likely to respond, but there's also a lot more money involved. If you're talking to smaller influencers where you're not even paying them, it might take a couple of tries for them to just catch your attention. Once you get their attention, what I recommend is, hey, here's what I'm offering, whether it's money, whether it's free product, whether it's a coupon code or a giveaway. There's a lot of ways you can structure this approach. Super important to get the agreement and sign a contract. And my next slide is about the contract, so we can go into the details of what you need to make sure is in those contracts, because it's a little bit of the wild, wild west. Some of it is on purpose, some of it might be incompetence, but you need to make sure that you're protected. And even then, things might fall through the cracks. So you just need to be prepared for that. When you do send product, I know this sounds very basic, but send a tracking link, track the product yourself. Again, these influencers are being bombarded with products. One note I would make here is, about a year ago, there was a huge trend in sending huge boxes with a lot of extra packaging. So they would do this crazy unboxing. Influencers are so over that right now. They're worried about the environment. They don't want to overpackage. So something nice and simple, a personal note goes a long way, but keep it simple. Don't go too crazy with too much packaging, too huge a box. They don't have where to put it anyway. So, keep it streamlined, keep it focused on your product. Again, because you have the tracking link, you're going to know when the product arrives, and if it's been signed, follow up. Hey, I just saw you got your email. You just got your product. What do you think? When do you think you're posting? Another super important thing is once they've had the product for a couple of days, try to get a sense of when they plan on posting, when they plan on shooting the content. Make sure they remember, because even if it's in the contract, if they forget to send you the link to check and they already posted, you're in a very tough spot. So much better to remind them ahead of time that you're going to want to check that post. And what I will say here, listen, I think that as brand owners, it is our responsibility to pick the best influencers, the ones that tie best to our brand and to our customers, but you need to give them creative license. I am a big believer in very light touch when it comes to editing. If your price is incorrect, maybe they just overwrite it. If the product is completely misspelled, they can they can annotate it with the right product, but don't drive them crazy with edits. What you're going to do is get a very pissed off influencer who creates a very fake sounding video or post that doesn't convert. So I've been in those situations, and when you keep on going back and forth, it just ends up being a much worse product. So take a very, very light touch. I mean, if things are totally incorrect, definitely make sure the links work, because a lot of times they put the wrong link. Make sure they have the correct coupon code, basic things like that, definitely. But don't go too deep into correcting their content because you're going to end up with a very poor product. Again, think that you chose that influencer for a reason, and you should trust them to be able to communicate with their audience and explain your product. And the last thing I would say is be very conscious of when they are posting, because, the influencer just wants to get it out. He just wants to get paid, wants to get the next post out. They want to continue to engage their audience. But as a brand, it matters a lot when they post. So for example, one of the things we learned is holidays are terrible. Consumers may or may not be watching. They may or may not be shopping. So even if you're doing a holiday post, post well ahead of the holiday, not on the holiday, not on Thanksgiving Day, not on Labor Day. In general, I would say that's one of the big things. And if there's any seasonality in your product, make sure that you are hitting that seasonality with the influencer posts. Sorry, I'll take a breath. So here on best practices, I just put down a couple of notes on contracts. Listen, again, it's a very, I always explain it as it's a very unbalanced relationship with an influencer. Why? Because yes, you may be paying them for a post, but in the end, you're a brand with maybe 20,000 Instagram followers, and you're talking to them because they have 150,000 Instagram followers. So you never want to be in a situation where they're speaking poorly of you, where they're saying you didn't pay them or things were not agreed to. So it really matters to do that work up front to make sure that they're clear on the expectations, that they understand what kind of work they need to do, so that you don't end up on the back end in a situation where they're unhappy because you make them change things, or you're unhappy because the video is not what you expected. Take the time. So when I say a contract, it's not just the contract, it's always the talking points, the links, the coupon codes. Make sure you lay it all out for them and it's all very easy to reference. One note more on the legal side, two things that I really feel very strongly about. One is make sure you have the rights to the content, because it's very important to it's very important to maximize the value. So particularly if you're running Facebook ads, or I guess now it's going to be Snapchat ads, that content can be incredibly valuable. So one of the most effective tactics that we did at Scentbird was downloading the YouTube videos, editing that content down to a short 30-second post and reposting it as Facebook ads. And that drove the majority of our Facebook sales. So, as you become more sophisticated, you can even ask influencers to create content specifically for Facebook and not even post it. So those are some of the things you could do with influencers. But some influencers will push back. Some influencers will ask for extra fees. So when that is the case, you'll have to make a judgment call on whether it's the right thing for you. But definitely try to get the rights for the post. The other thing is, it's not worth getting in trouble with the FTC. Just make sure they disclose that it's an ad. At this point, the consumer doesn't even notice. They don't even care. They know it's an ad. They're smart enough. Most influencers will talk honestly to their audience and say, hey, I need to make a living. So just make sure that you include that in the contract, and they're aware that they need to keep the hashtag ad, or however they explain that it's a sponsored post. Talking points. Here, it goes back to my earlier point about very light editing. Don't bombard them with an entire script that you expect them to read word by word. In fact, if you do that, they will read it word by word, and it ends up being a terrible video that does not convert. So what I recommend is just 4 or 5 bullet points. Think about what you want the concept of the video to be. What we used to do is have 3 or 4 concepts ready to go. So one might be about the size of the spray, one might be about a perfume collection, one might be about new scents for spring. So whatever your product is, have 3 or 4 talking points. Obviously, you need 2 bullets that explain your product, and then maybe 3 or 4 that are different concepts that the influencer can use. In the end, they're going to use whatever they want, but it'll give them some guidance. I also think it's really important, the do's and don'ts. So for example, for us, we didn't want to be featured with drugstore products because we felt like it really lowered the value of our product, and we were designer fragrances. So whatever the reason may be, another thing that you might test, and you might realize that certain type of content doesn't convert. So a typical example for us, for Scentbird, was that even though travel videos where they were like, what's in my luggage, made a lot of sense because you had a little travel spray, what would happen is nobody would subscribe, because who wants to have a subscription to something you only use when you travel? So even though it made sense conceptually, it did not make sense from a conversion rate. So again, it goes back to, once you test and learn, once you look at all these different concepts and try to figure out what works, add it to the do's and don'ts. Bit.ly link and coupon code, super important to track your results. So with the Bit.ly link, if your consumer clicks through, you'll be able to see not just that they're coming through YouTube, but specifically that they're coming through the UTM that ties to that influencer. Coupon codes, we use them mostly not just because we were giving them the discount, but most importantly because it allowed us to track that conversion. One little expert tip here on the coupon code: save the first names for the really large influencers, because what would happen is you're going to end up with a ton of Kellys and a ton of Johns. So I sort of saved the really memorable, easy to remember codes for the larger influencers. And then for the smaller influencer, just use XYZ30 or something like that. It's just a way to keep it all organized and make sure that you're keeping records of all those coupon codes. Because the one thing you'll notice, and that particularly one of the reasons we loved YouTube, is that it can have a long tail. So there could be an influencer that you worked with a year ago and people are still watching that video and still using that coupon code. So in my opinion, it is to your advantage to have a very long expiration date for the coupon codes. But again, it depends on the product, depends on the nature of your product. Some people want very short and time sensitive. And again, the last bullet here is the right to review the post and edit if needed. Again, you don't want to be in a situation where that comes up at the end and then it's a bad situation for everyone. One thing I will note, even if it's an unpaid post, what we did is we created a very simplified Google form where they would just fill in their name, fill in their channel, fill in what the deliverable was, and it just told them very quickly what the talking points was and what the expectations were. Some might not sign it, particularly if they're not getting paid. They're like, why do I need to bother? But again, it just gives you extra protection and helps you specify all the things that need to happen, all the deliverables that you want in the post. Finally, here in terms of tracking and optimizing, as you can see in the top picture, above the fold, this is particularly relevant for YouTube. We saw huge difference if the influencer put the link to our website above the fold versus below the fold. So that's really important to try to negotiate it, particularly with the large influencers where you're paying a lot of money. The other thing is below the fold, one opportunity is you can put above the fold the general link to your website, and then below the fold specific links to specific products that are being mentioned in the video. And that gives you extra links to your product. Then tracking and optimize. And this goes back to this database. Track every influencer so you can easily analyze by size, gender, content type, etc. You're going to have a lot of thesis around what type of influencers work for you. Male, female, type of content, type of video, size. The only way to do it is try it. So our approach was always to take a list of maybe 5 influencers, I mean, sometimes 10 if it was less expensive, and prove out those theories, and then you go out and maximize it. So test different size of influencers, test different size of contests, test different talking points. There are things that you learn very quickly. Obviously for us, for example, we were based in the US, we only sold to the US. So very quickly we learned that you had to ask what percentage of their followers were in the US, and if it was below a certain percent, for us it was under 50, we just wouldn't work with those influencers because half of the people we were talking to couldn't buy our product. So, certain things you don't even need to test, you're just going to know. But a lot of things you just have to keep on testing those hypotheses and making sure you understand what works, what doesn't work, etc. And that is it. I think I went really, really fast. So I apologize if that was really fast. Derek, I don't know if we have a couple of minutes for questions or if you're just jumping to the next one.
We're a little short on time, but man, Rachel, that was amazing. Everything you said, I was like, yes, yes, yes. The above the fold thing, I think, is just like this huge thing that people forget. It's like, make sure the influencer knows, put it above the fold. And I said in chat, I worked at a URL shortener called Rebrandly. So you can get
Cool.
your own branded short links really easily.
Right.
For the mega influencers, you could even buy them a domain. So you could just buy the domain and use that as the short link. And I do believe that we've seen in a few other cases, maybe it wasn't this summit, but in another summit, somebody said that if you use somebody's name, now it was the first name of the customer, if you use that in the coupon code, it's more likely to convert. But I still feel like the first name of the influencer is going to get you that higher conversion rate. So it's worth it if you can do it. But like you said, save the.
It just gets very tricky because after a while you're going to run out of Marys and Janes. That's the challenging part. But yes, definitely personalized coupon codes. If you're able to, maybe you use for your customers a different value, or you use first name, last name, and then for influencers you use, Candy 30, and that way you can differentiate one from the other when you're tracking it.
Yeah, and I think it's so important. I mean, if you're an e-commerce store owner, like listening to Rachel's presentation, it's your team that has to execute on the influencer marketing. You got to scale this out of your hair. I don't think you can do it as like a solopreneur, or if you've got like a very small or one-person marketing team. One person maybe can be dedicated to it, but you need that person to report on this monthly so that you can do kind of this post analysis of, like you said, what's working, what's not.
The one thing, I'm not here to badmouth agencies, but I do think that particularly on influencer marketing, if you don't have that close touch, there's a real conflict of interest with a lot of agencies because they're getting paid on the value of what they're posting, right? So it's sort of to their advantage to book a lot of expensive influencers. So you have to be really careful and really thoughtful, because there might be, part of the testing and learning is that you might find some great values out there, and you have to look at influencer marketing as a whole. So, that's why I started in the beginning with the slide of thinking about your plan, because what we did is we said, okay, we'll spend X number of dollars on 3 to 4 of these large, reach and awareness type influencers, but then we're going to split up the rest of it into very small influencers, because we know that way we can build the best plan. So thinking about it that way, in a more holistic way, gives you a better plan on influencers.
Yeah, I agree. And it is a tough thing to pass off to an agency, and it needs to be done very, very carefully. You need to have the right partner, the right budget, the right internal team to coordinate. So I completely agree with you.
Cool.
Thank you again, Rachel. I've put your email here in chat if people want to follow up with you.
Feel free to email me if you guys have any questions.
It's a pleasure having you. I look forward to talking more influencer marketing with you in the future.
Anytime.